The question has lingered for generations, whispered by veterans, analyzed by historians, and fiercely debated in dimly lit forums and crowded museum halls, in a war defined by steel, fire, and unimaginable human cost. Which weapons truly inspired fear? Not respect. Not strategic admiration. Fear. The kind that tightens a soldier's chest before dawn, the kind that makes a convoy hesitate on an empty road, the kind that travels faster than the weapon itself. It is a question loaded with memory and myth, and for decades it resisted an answer. But today, those shadows begin to lift. The stories buried in reports and testimonies begin to breathe again. And the truth emerges from the fog of war like a shape long avoided. The men who fought did not fear the same things the public glorified. Their nightmares looked different. They sounded different. And they arrived without warning. Every detail here comes from hands-on records, field diaries stained with mud and oil, decrypted communications once considered too sensitive to publish, battle maps marked by trembling fingers, and official documents preserved in military archives around the world. This is not guesswork or legend. It is what the soldiers themselves said, what officers wrote in their after-action reports, what command intelligence circled as urgent, critical, or morale-impacting. All of it converges to reveal a story deeper than machinery. It reveals a catalog of terror that shaped decisions, altered strategies, and changed the course of the conflict. To understand the war truthfully, one must understand fear. Our rules are simple, because the war was not. Only weapons that actually fought are included here. Only weapons that faced men under fire, affected behavior, and made entire units rethink their next step. Their ranking follows 4 pillars: how deeply they shook morale, how effective they proved in real combat, how sharply they disrupted enemy plans, and how enduring their reputation became in the testimonies of those who survived. No prototypes. No paper projects. Nothing that never fired a shot in anger. Only the instruments that carved themselves into memory. And so the story begins where countless Allied tank crews first learned humility, with a cannon that commanded respect at distances where most weapons failed. The German 88mm, born as an anti-aircraft gun, was never meant to terrorize tank battalions, but it did. Its creators forged it to reach high into the sky and tear enemy bombers to pieces, yet its power found a far more personal purpose on the ground. As the war ignited across Europe and Africa, German tacticians realized that this sleek, long-barreled machine could destroy tanks long before those tanks could defend themselves. The moment this fact reached British intelligence, cold notes appeared in their reports: approach with caution. Maintain awareness of concealed positions. Avoid open terrain. The 88 had begun rewriting the rules. It was not just the weapon's engineering, though its muzzle velocity was the envy of every armorer, it was the way it appeared in battle. Silent, invisible, patient. A tank commander would maneuver confidently across a field, thinking the path clear, when suddenly a crack like a whip sliced the air. A second later, fire bloomed against armor, and a machine weighing 30 tons shuddered and died. Many crews never even saw the flash that killed them. They only felt the impact, smelled the smoke, and understood that they had crossed into the 88's domain. In North Africa, Rommel positioned these guns like chess pieces, covering dunes and ridges with lethal precision. In Normandy, they hid behind hedgerows and fields of grain, waiting for Allied armor to reveal itself just long enough. Every time the gun fired, stories grew around it. Every time a tank fell without warning, the legend grew stronger. Its limitations were real, it was heavy, it required disciplined crews, it needed cover. But none of that mattered to the men rolling toward the front in vehicles powered by hope and steel. They knew what the weapon could do. They had seen the wreckage. They had heard the stories: a single cannon halting an entire column, a well-trained crew holding back a combined arms advance. What the 88 destroyed was not just metal. It damaged confidence itself. Even when the gun wasn't present, soldiers feared it might be. Then came a weapon born not of precision, but of chaos, a weapon whose terrifying reputation began not with impact, but with sound. When the Soviet Katyusha battalion opened fire, the battlefield changed. Raised on the back of a simple truck, these launchers unleashed dozens of rockets within seconds, each projectile screaming through the air like an accusation. German troops, who prided themselves on discipline and order, found themselves reduced to instinct. Veterans described the noise as something approaching primal. At Stalingrad, men wrote that the shrieking of incoming rockets cut straight into their nerves. Entire companies scattered, searching for cover they knew wouldn't save them. The ground shook so violently that some believed an earthquake had struck. The Katyusha was not accurate. It was barely controllable. Its reload time left crews exposed and vulnerable. But none of that mattered. The weapon was designed for shock, and shock it delivered. The arrival of a Katyusha barrage meant the Soviet assault was near, that the Red Army was about to sweep forward with tanks and infantry and sheer momentum. It prepared the battlefield by breaking the enemy's composure. And in war, the collapse of composure is sometimes more decisive than the collapse of armor. To face a storm of rockets that could wipe out everything within 100 meters in an instant was to face a reminder that survival was not always in a soldier's hands. The Katyusha did not aim to kill with precision. It aimed to terrify with inevitability. Beyond the forests and frozen fields where the Katyusha roared, a quieter terror haunted the oceans. No sound defined it. No roar announced it. It lived beneath the waves, waiting, listening, hunting. The German U-boat Wolfpack changed the way sailors understood the sea. For centuries, the ocean was feared for storms and darkness. But now, the fear had a commander, a strategy, and a torpedo. Convoys carrying food, weapons, fuel, and hope across the Atlantic suddenly found themselves stalked by an enemy they could not see. A captain might stand on the deck at sunset, scanning the calm water, believing the night would be peaceful. But beneath the surface, steel shadows were gathering. The Wolfpack relied on coordination and coldness. One submarine would spot a convoy, signal its position, and others would converge. Under cover of night, they rose from the deep, launching torpedoes into unsuspecting ships. Explosions burst like lightning across the dark waves. Men had minutes, sometimes seconds, to abandon ship, knowing the ocean itself could kill them faster than flames. Survivors described hearing the dull thud of another ship being torn apart, then another, the cries carried by wind and water. Some convoys lost half their vessels before dawn. And the worst part was the silence that followed. The ocean swallowed the noise. The enemy vanished again into the depths. It was only after Allied forces developed radar, sonar, escort carriers, and depth-charge strategies that the tide shifted. By 1943, U-boat losses soared. But for the first half of the war, they were unmatched predators. Sailors feared them more than storms, more than enemy planes, more than fire. The Wolfpack proved that terror does not need volume. It only needs patience. And as this ranking prepares to enter its top tier, the question turns to you. Where do you watch from? Which weapon do you believe, before hearing the rest, deserves the number one place? The debate is part of the story, and the fear these weapons inspired shape battles as surely as strategy or courage. The next entries only grow darker, more personal, and more revealing of what human beings endure when confronted with machines built to break their spirit. Fear in war is rarely logical. It is rarely tied to statistics, range, or even mortality rates. It attaches itself to unpredictability, to the moments when soldiers realize they are facing something that refuses to follow the normal rules, something driven by a force beyond calculation. Nowhere did this become clearer than in the Pacific, when Japanese pilots began turning their aircraft into weapons of their own bodies. By late 1944, the Japanese military understood the scale of the American naval presence and the impossibility of matching it plane for plane, ship for ship. Their answer was a tactic both desperate and devastating: the kamikaze. To the men aboard American ships, the first moments of a kamikaze attack felt surreal. A small speck on the horizon grew into a shape, then a plane, and then, impossibly, it did not pull away. It did not attempt evasive maneuvers or try to save itself. It simply kept coming, engine screaming, wing steady, diving with a precision that belonged more to will than to training. Anti-aircraft guns erupted, tracers carved lines through the sky, bursts of smoke surrounded the aircraft, but still it came, slicing through fire as if the flames were illusion. For some sailors, this was their first experience with an enemy who had already accepted his own death before the battle even began. The psychological impact was immediate and profound. Kamikaze strikes tore through destroyers, escorts, and even aircraft carriers. A small plane filled with explosives could rip open the deck of a carrier, ignite fuel stores, and send lethal shrapnel across hundreds of feet. Survivors spoke later of the haunting moment when they realized the pilot staring at them through the canopy did not intend to live. The weapon did not rely on technology or engineering but on the terrifying truth that the human mind, when pushed to extremity, becomes a weapon more fearful than steel. Its limitations were enormous: irreversible loss of trained pilots, emotional devastation at home, and no realistic chance of shifting the war's direction. But none of that mattered on the day of the attack. For those minutes of descent, the kamikaze was the most feared presence in the sky. While kamikaze pilots crushed the boundaries of sacrifice, the British Royal Air Force struck at Germany with a very different force, not individual devotion but industrial-scale devastation delivered in the dark. The Lancaster bomber became the instrument of Britain's nighttime campaign, a machine capable of carrying enormous payloads deep into enemy territory. It was not subtle. It was not surgical. It was a shadow overhead, multiplied by hundreds, shaping the night into a weapon that reached far beyond the battlefield. To German civilians and soldiers alike, the howl of approaching Lancasters signaled the arrival of a terror that could not be fought with rifles or tanks. Entire cities braced for the thunder that followed. The bomb bay doors opened, and within moments a rain of explosives began to fall. Streets splintered, factories vanished in clouds of debris, firestorms ignited that pulled oxygen from the air and devoured everything within their reach. Hamburg's Inferno became legendary not because of its strategic impact, but because of its human one. Survivors described the heat as something alive, something that chased them down corridors and across squares, something that climbed walls and swallowed entire blocks in minutes. The Lancaster raids grew into a presence that stretched beyond any single mission. Air raid sirens became a nightly ritual. Families huddled in bunkers. Soldiers on leave returned home to find their neighborhoods unrecognizable. Even soldiers at the front heard stories of entire districts erased overnight, and morale cracked under the weight of knowing that the enemy could reach their homes long before they could defend them. The limitations of the raids were known: high RAF casualties, limited precision, ethical debates that continue even now. But to the people below the falling bombs, those limitations did not matter. Fear is a personal thing, and the Lancaster turned fear into something that arrived on a timetable. Across the Pacific Islands, fear took a different shape, one that burned hotter and closer. In cramped jungles, caves, and hidden bunkers, American forces confronted enemy positions designed to be impervious to bullets and artillery. Japanese soldiers dug deep into volcanic rock, creating labyrinths of tunnels that resisted almost every assault. To clear them, the United States deployed the one weapon that soldiers on both sides dreaded equally: the flamethrower. Two forms emerged: the portable infantry flamethrower and the Sherman tank modified to carry a flame projector capable of spewing arcs of fire across dozens of meters. The moment the tank approached, defenders felt a shift in the air. It was not subtle like gas, not distant like artillery, not precise like rifle fire. It was a wave of heat and sound that consumed everything in its path. Flame spilled into cave mouths, carrying with it smoke, heat, panic. The human mind is not designed to face fire at arm's length. Soldiers described hearing the whoosh of ignition, followed by screams, followed by silence. Even when the flamethrower wasn't used, the threat of it shaped the ground battle. Some Japanese forces chose suicide charges rather than face the flames. But the weapon was dangerous for its operators as well. Those carrying flamethrowers instantly became primary targets. They moved with the weight of death on their backs, literally. One bullet to the fuel tank could turn them into a torch. Tank-mounted versions reduced this risk but became magnets for enemy fire. Still, the weapon's psychological dominance was undeniable. No one wanted to be inside a bunker when the first jet of flame arrived. Fire is ancient. Fire is instinctual. And the fear it commands is older than war itself. If terror on the ground belonged to flame, terror on the battlefield belonged to steel, massive, implacable, and louder than anything else. The German Tiger tank earned a reputation out of proportion to its numbers because its very presence altered the rhythm of battle. Crews inside Allied tanks spoke of hearing a distant engine rumble and feeling their stomachs tighten. Tiger, someone would say, often without proof. That was the power of the machine. The idea of it could stall in advance. The Tiger was slow, heavy, prone to mechanical breakdowns, and expensive to maintain. But none of that mattered in the moment of confrontation. Its thick armor absorbed hits that would have shattered other vehicles. Its 88mm gun, the same lethal weapon used in the anti-tank role, reached out across open fields and turned enemy armor into wreckage. Allied units sometimes required multiple tanks working together to flank and overwhelm a single Tiger. Infantry learned to avoid open ground when its silhouette appeared on the horizon. On the Eastern Front, Soviet soldiers told stories of Tigers wiping out entire platoons of T-34s before retreating behind smoke. The tank's myth grew as fast as its kill count. Its true impact lay not just in its tactical victories but in its shadow. Even when no Tigers were present, Allied troops sometimes halted offensives based on rumors. That is fear at its purest. The enemy becomes powerful even in absence. And that power defined the Tiger's legacy. Yet everything in the war, from artillery to rockets, from tanks to flames, would ultimately be dwarfed by what came next. To reach the final item on this list is to approach the boundary between conventional war and something entirely different. Before we cross that boundary, consider the question again: which weapon terrified not just soldiers but nations, not just armies but entire generations? The answer lies ahead, and once it arrives, the world will never return to what it was before. The closer the war moved toward its end, the more the world sensed that something unimaginable was forming behind closed laboratory doors, deep in the desert, beneath layers of secrecy and urgency. Rumors circulated among intelligence officers. Enemy scientists disappeared. Cargo shipments traveled under armed escort. Yet even with all these signs, no one fully understood what was coming, not the soldiers fighting across the Pacific, not the civilians bracing for invasion, and not even many of the minds helping build the weapon itself. They knew only this: the United States was working on a device that would change everything. Few believed it would actually work. Fewer still grasped the magnitude of what awaited. When the B-29 Enola Gay lifted off from Tinian on the morning of August 6, 1945, its mission was just another coded entry in the war's vast ledger. Inside its belly was a bomb unlike any other. Not a piece of metal or steel meant to pierce armor. Not a payload meant to ignite fires through saturation bombing. This was the result of years of theory, experimentation, fear, and ambition, a weapon built from the fabric of matter itself. The Japanese city of Hiroshima lay ahead, unaware that history was about to split into two eras, before and after. The hours that followed would become some of the most studied and discussed moments in human existence. The Enola Gay approached the target, bomb bay doors opened, and the device fell silently through the air. People on the ground looked up, curious, unaware. At precisely 8:15 a.m., a flash brighter than the sun erupted. A wave tore outward faster than thought. Buildings crumpled instantly. Shadows burned into the very stone of streets and bridges. Those who survived the first seconds found themselves in a world transformed, a landscape stripped of shape, engulfed in heat, smoke, shock, and silence. Firestorms raged. A radius of destruction miles wide appeared in the span of a single breath. 3 days later, when the second bomb fell over Nagasaki, the world no longer doubted what had happened in Hiroshima. The fear that now spread across continents was not mere shock. It was recognition that humanity had stepped beyond the boundaries of all past conflict, that the war had produced something beyond the grasp of generals or soldiers. The detonation was not a weapon in the traditional sense. It was a revelation of danger hidden inside the smallest pieces of the universe. It erased the notion that distance, armor, or fortification could provide safety. And unlike every other weapon ever built, its effects did not end when the smoke cleared. Radiation lingered, invisible and deadly, reshaping lives long after the blasts. The immediate military impact was decisive. Japan surrendered. Plans for a bloody invasion of the home islands, plans projected to cost millions of lives, were abandoned. Across Europe and the Pacific, soldiers realized they had witnessed the last gasp of the old world. Governments studied the bomb. Scientists reconsidered their role. Civilians saw newspapers with images they could barely comprehend. What terrified the enemy in the final days of the war was not the explosion alone, but the knowledge that mankind had entered an age where destruction could come from a single aircraft, a single weapon, a single decision. The atomic bomb ended the debate. No tank, flame, cannon, or rocket could compare. Fear on the battlefield is immediate, but this was something else entirely, a fear that spread across borders, generations, and ideologies. A weapon that made even victory taste uncertain. A weapon that forced the world to ask what humanity was willing to risk in its pursuit of power. Looking back on these weapons, each terrifying in its own way, reveals a truth that reaches far beyond World War II. Fear shapes the future of warfare just as surely as innovation. The 88mm cannon taught armies that precision could dominate at distance. The Katyusha showed that chaos could break disciplined troops. Wolf packs rewrote naval strategy. Kamikaze attacks exposed the limits of conventional defense. The Lancaster forced nations to confront the power of industrialized bombing. Flame reminded soldiers of the primal terror embedded in fire. The Tiger tank proved that a single weapon could cast a psychological shadow larger than entire divisions. And the atomic bomb demonstrated that the world had crossed into an era where destruction was no longer limited by imagination, but only by restraint. War is a brutal teacher, and its lessons are written not just in victories and defeats, but in the memories of those who survived. These weapons were feared not simply because of what they could destroy, but because of what they represented: the relentless drive to dominate, the desperation of nations on the brink, the ingenuity that can rise in times of crisis, and the darkness that can accompany it. To study them is to study humanity itself, its brilliance, its terror, and its capacity to redefine the rules of existence. As the narrative reaches its end, the question returns: which weapon would you fear most if you stood in the boots of those who fought? Which sound would shake you more, a distant engine, a descending scream, a silent ocean, or a sun born on earth? History offers its answers, but your voice completes the story. So now, share your thoughts. What weapon do you believe dominated the battlefield with fear? Did this ranking surprise you? Do you agree, Or do you think another weapon deserves the top spot? Your perspective matters, because history grows sharper every time it is examined through new eyes. Join the discussion, and let this chapter of the past continue to breathe through your voice.